So welcome everybody to part 2 of the learning chapter. In your textbook, it was actually the chapter 6. And so just as a reminder, if you haven't had a chance to do so, make sure that you go and review the first part, which I'll upload to the portal. But today we're going to continue with talking about operant conditioning. So just as a review, the previous class, we talked about classical conditioning and we talked about Ivan Pavlov, okay? So today we're actually going to finish up and we're going to talk about operant conditioning, known as B.F. Skinner. And remember that you want to know the names of the theory along with the theorist, meaning their names of who develops what, okay? So one thing that I did not mention in the previous class is another word you want to know in terms of what classical conditioning is you want to know that it's also known as pairing. So if you have your notes, make sure that you write down that classical conditioning is also known as pairing. And if you think about what we talked about, remember when I paired like the lion or the tiger with the music, the neutral stimulus, and then all of a sudden when we took out the lion or the tiger, when we went into class and you just heard a song, the song generated the same response it would have, like the fight or flight response, that it would have if you would have just saw the lion or the tiger. So make sure that you write down that classical conditioning is also known as pairing. So now let's get into operant conditioning. So this gentleman, his name is B.F. Skinner, and he is the founder theorist of operant conditioning. And as usual, I'll give you like the terminology that's listed in your book. And then I'm also going to break it down into regular English, okay? So you definitely need to know these terms. Per usual, I'm not expecting you to write down everything on the screen. There's a typo. But you are required to understand what these terms mean, okay? And so what I've done as a shortcut is I'm going to go over them, but I put the regular like meaning into parentheses. So when we talk about acquisition is you're learning a new behavior. Acquisition is you're learning a new behavior. So acquisition is associating the neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus, just like we did with the music and the bell, right? Extinction when we're talking about learning behaviors, because all of this has to do with learned behaviors. Extinction is we're getting rid of something. So the textbook definition reads, diminishing the conditioned response by no longer using the conditioned stimulus. So that means that we no longer want the person to have their response. So if we don't want the dog to salivate, we're going to now remove the bell. Does that make sense? Okay. And that's just going back to classical conditioning. All of this, I promise, will make sense on the next slide. Spontaneous recovery. Spontaneous recovery means that you have taught someone a new behavior, and you suppress the old behavior that you didn't want, and somehow the behavior comes back, okay? So in textbook definition, it says reappearance of the conditioned response. So let's just think about habits. Habits, we get rid of them, and then the goal would be the way the habit would stay away is if you replaced it with another behavior. But we're human, which means that at any given time, that old behavior can be triggered to come back. It doesn't mean that it's going to stay back, okay? Generalization is exactly what it sounds like. Everything looks the same. And then discrimination is you can tell the difference. And so if I had not already confused you with all these words, let me just give you a real live example. So if you've ever been around a baby, I think that most of us have been around somebody's baby, even if it's not like a sibling or something, okay? So I'm going to look at a baby's behavior. So I'm going to be the baby in your house, all right? So if we look at acquisition is the learning of a new behavior. So acquisition, if I cry, I realize you're going to pick me up. So what I've learned quickly is if I cry, you'll pick me up. So what will I continue to do? I'll continue to cry. The continuous crying is the new learned behavior. Think about acquisition as you've acquired something new. Now, again, the reason why I showed you the previous slide is because you do need to know and understand the textbook definition, because odds are, for example, on a quiz, you will not see this definition. You will see these definition. Okay, you got that? So extinction is when I cry, all of a sudden, you no longer pick me up. So what happens is I stop crying so much. I still will cry because I'm a baby and I can't talk, but I will not cry as much to get my way, because what you've done as my caregiver is you've learned how to not pick me up every time I cry. So you basically helped me make the behavior extinct. You made it go away, okay? The third one, spontaneous recovery. So let's just say you taught me how not to cry unless I need something. And I stopped crying a lot. However, you send me to my grandparents' house this weekend. So my grandparents have not been taught everything that you've done with me. So I go over there and I just cry and I realize, oh, they pick me up every time. So my grandparents picked me up. I didn't know them yet. So I began screaming and crying all over again. And then I realized, oh, I can just do this and they'll pick me up. So I'm gonna keep doing it. Put a 1 in the chat box, or if they're watching this later in the YouTube box, but put a 1 in the chat box if you've seen this before with spontaneous recovery, meaning you thought you got rid of a behavior, or you thought a kid got rid of a behavior, and then it came back and you were like, oh my God, now I gotta teach this kid all over? No. It just means that, 1, you should be teaching other people around you. So if you've had a hand in training a pet or training a human being, make sure that when that person or that pet is around someone else, especially like a dog, you have to make sure that you are also training the other people that are going to be in a caregiver role, if that makes sense, with this other person or pet, so that they are emulating or doing the same thing that you're doing to extinct the behavior. I hope that really makes sense. So what tends to happen with human behavior is we will train a person on something or a dog, and then we just give it to someone else while we go out of town, run to the store or something like that, or go to work. And then we wonder why when we get the person or the pet back, the pet looks like they were before they learned the new behavior. And you're like, what the heck, right? Generalization. I cannot tell the difference between any adult, because to a baby, everybody looks so big to me. So I'm just going to cry anytime any adult picks me up. That's generalization. Generalization is I cannot tell the difference between mom, dad, grandma, big sister, big cousin. So I'm just going to cry when anybody pick me up because I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Okay. Now, discrimination. I only cry when you are not my parent and you pick me up. So this might sound very manipulative. Children do know and learn quickly how to tell the difference between two different people. They learn very quick. As teenagers, let's not lie. Put a 2 in the chat box or comment box if this describes you. You live in a home full of 2 adults. It can be grandparents, big sisters, big brothers, aunties, whatever. And you know who to go to get something, depending on what it is. Put a 2 in the chat box if this describes you, don't lie. And then you know who not to go to, whether it's a certain day, whether it's you heard your parents arguing, so you like, I know not to go to dad because he didn't have a good day at work yesterday. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know who to go to. Now, believe it or not, children as young as my son too, he knows how to tell the difference. If he gets popped because he says no or keeps doing something that we tell him not to do, like keep jumping on the couch and we keep telling him no, get down. And now he's learned how to say no. With certain behaviors, he might get a little, it might be super soft. But what does he do? Even if I'm the one to pop him, he'll run. Well, if I'm the one to pop him, now he runs to his big brother. That's 9. But if it's between him and my husband, even if my husband says, like, he raises his voice, he may then run to me and start crying. And why does he do that? Because he knows that I'm going to coddle him, right? So it's very hard sometimes because I don't want to coddle him every single time, because I also don't want him growing up to think that every time I do something and I know I'm not supposed to do it and I get in trouble by dad, I can just go to mom and she's going to coddle me. But let's be real. We all got somebody like that in our house. Like, we know who's going to coddle us, right? Okay. So let's get into, those are some key terms that you want to be familiar with operant conditioning. So now let's get into reward and punishment, okay? So just like Pavlov with the dog, they would do experiments on animals. So let's just take this little, the little mice, okay? So let's just say I'm the little mice in the little box, and I'm in my office right now, so I'm in the little box, right? So when you first introduce me, the animal, to this box, I don't know what it is. It just looks weird. But look at the graphics. You have the speaker, the signal light, a lever for me to push, but I don't know what the push is for yet, because you have to teach me a new behavior. You have the pellets, similar to the dog powder or the dog food with the Pavlov's dog. You have the two dispensers. So my little pellet is going to come through the dispenser. I'm going to get it right here through this little hole, the food cup. Electric grid, you know, maybe they did something with the little animal, and clearly the shock, right? So let's talk about new behaviors. This is Skinner in his experiment little box, right? And he focused on what's called the operant chamber, like operant conditioning. So operant chamber contains a bar, a key that an animal can manipulate to obtain food and water. Manipulation just simply means they need to do something in order to get something back. The chamber includes a device to record the animal's rates of bar pressing. So if you remember Pavlov, before he started ringing the bell, he wanted to see how many times the dog would salivate. Remember, there was a little tube connected to the dog's like mouth. So he wanted to see how many times the dog would automatically salivate just with an unlearned stimulus, like the dog powder, just to see what he was going to do. And then once he realized, like, oh, this dog does that automatically, now let me see if I can teach the pet by pairing two things together. So Skinner came in and he took it a step further. So he did what's called shaping a behavior, right? So put a 3 in the chat box if you've ever helped shape a behavior of a pet, like you've taught a pet how to sit down, you've taught a pet how to scratch at the door to go outside. Maybe you taught your little sister or brother or a little niece or nephew how to say potty when they have to go use the bathroom. You've taught somebody something. Okay, and it could be a human, all right? Because we've all learned human behavior, which is why we adhere to laws. We know what things we are or are not supposed to do. So let's talk about shaping behavior. So just to move quickly through these slides, I'm just going to demonstrate it for you, okay? So I'm the animal and you put me in the box. The box is lit in a very dark room. So let's just say if I dimmed my lights and then I just have this little ring light, right? So when I face, I don't know, let's just say the ring light is the you can't see it, but let's just say it's the lever. So when you place me in the box automatically, I don't know initially what to do if you follow. All I know is what instinctively I'm going to do. So if I see that there's a light, I'm going to turn toward the light. But this is called shaping the behavior. Shaping a behavior is taking me step by step, one thing at a time, to condition me to do what you want me to do. So one of the mistakes that a lot of, I'm going to say, parents make, when even myself, when we're teaching another human being something new, sometimes we forget that they have never learned this behavior. So we just say, go do it, right? So put a 1 in the chat box if you've ever done this with like a little kid. Go make your bed. And they're 4 or 5. You've never modeled to them how to make their bed. You just probably share a room with them and you make your bed in front of them, but yet you expect that this 4-year-old that just came out of the womb 4 years ago, that they know how to just make their bed just because they have watched you? No, they're 4. You actually have to sit down and even train adults how to do stuff, right? So when you first put me in the box, I automatically turn to the lever. So what you're going to do to condition that behavior over and over again before, so if you got to teach somebody something, please listen to this, okay? Before you teach me the second step, you got to make sure that the first step is down packed, okay? So now that you recognize that, boom, every time I drop her in the box, she turns to the lever, check mark, right? Now the next step would be, now you need me to approach the lever. So I'm not going to keep repeating this over and over, but you get my drift. So now you're going to make me approach the lever once you realize, like, because I probably smell the pellets, like the food. So I'm going to like lean forward and I'm like, that smells like my food, right? So after you see me do that a few times, then you're going to take me to the next step. So eventually what you want me to do is look at the lever, smell the lever, move toward the lever, and then eventually press the lever. And then once I realized I got rewarded for just pressing the lever, the goal would be that I continue to do that behavior every single time. So if you didn't know it, this is how your parents have trained or teachers have trained a lot of your behavior. All I have to do is tell you great job every time you get a green sticker when you come home from school. Think about how some of your teachers condition you. This is a high school class for college. And so put a 2 in the chat box if you remember being rewarded with a verbal praise or a sticker on a board in school. Put a 1 in the chat box if you remember that. In grade school, they had like a board and you would get like a red light, green light, yellow light, brown light, or some of you had like stickers, dinosaurs, big star to little star, right? So what your teacher was doing, because they learned child development, they learned psychology. So they learned how to condition your behavior very early on. And the goal would be that your parents or your caregivers at home would continue to move in the same direction. But see, again, that's where the loophole is, because it truly takes a village to raise a child. And what tends to happen, even if you look at some of your behaviors that you know doggone well you're not supposed to be doing, right? The reason why you may do those behaviors is because you think you're not going to get caught. So you may get caught at school, but your parents work a 9-to-5 job and they both have 2 jobs, so they're barely at home. So then you like, well, they ain't watching me, so I'm going to play the video game longer because they ain't tracking me. But I can't do this at school though, okay? So the goal would be that you condition someone to learn a new behavior. So it's called the shaping procedure, okay? Shaping, okay? Now let's move into reinforcements, which I've kind of just gave you an introduction. So write this down in your notes, and if you're a visual person, I would encourage you to take what I'm about to say very seriously. Positive reinforcement, put a plus sign. Very simple. Because if you think about a plus sign, what word comes to mind? Addition, adding something. So if you look at positive reinforcement, you're adding something. Same thing with negative reinforcement, it's a minus sign. Subtraction, taking away something. Okay? So first things first, after you wrote those things down, okay? You want to know the textbook definition, which is right here, of reinforcement. This is super important because if you don't know the definition of reinforcement, you're going to get positive and negative reinforcement mixed up. So the definition of just the word reinforcement is any event that strengthens a behavior. And the reason I said write this down, please write the definition of reinforcement down, is because when we start giving examples of positive and negative reinforcement, some people get the negative mixed up and they were like, that doesn't strengthen a behavior, but it does. It's just that we're adding or taking something away to get the behavior that we want. So I'll explain. So reinforcement is any event that strengthens a behavior, okay? So an example of positive reinforcement, which is increasing a behavior using a positive stimulus such as food. Some of you get money. Put an M in the chat box if you get money for a good report card, or you've ever gotten money. I don't care if it's $1. You got $1, $5. So I'll give you an example. This is actually a good example of both, and then we can move on. So positive reinforcement is increasing the behavior using a positive stimulus, such as food or money or something, or praise. It can be something non-tangible to get what we want. Then negative reinforcement is we're going to increase the behavior by stopping or reducing something. So we may take something away. Okay. So this example, my mom, she's a big giver when it comes down to academic performance. I'm an only child. I grew up in a single parent household, but my mom, she has a high school degree, and that's as far as she went. And she wanted, of course, more from me, which is what you should want for the next generation, which is, I'm sure, what your caregivers or parents want from you. And so what she did is she rewarded me even for good grades. So then my godbrother came along. And we had a family member, and she was given the name through the church and the family of a godmom. So she took that very seriously. So what she did when he got into middle school, or maybe high school, because I think at that point when we're getting into the 90s and 2000s or early 2000s, some of the kids were still getting like numbers. When in elementary school, I was actually getting letters, like just to tell my age. And so I believe in middle school she started this, but basically how she calculated how much he would get and put it too in the chat box if you were like, oh man, I would love this, right? Is if he got an A on his report card, he got $20 per A. Woo! For every B, he got, I don't know if he got 15 or 10, but let's just say 10, right? For every C, he got $5. Now here's the catch. If he got a D, he was minus $15. And if he got an F, he was minus $20. So technically, if his report card was split, he would be probably negative or a zero. So in the beginning, of course, in middle school, he was getting money in middle school. Now that I think about it, middle school and up to 9th or 10th grade, he was popping. Right now, for me, how I reinforced him is if he was doing well, I was the shoe girl. I was the sneakerhead. So I would purchase him, put a 2 in the chat box if you like this reward. If he would get good grades, which means that he's eligible to play football, then I would actually purchase him a new pair of cleats of his choice, no cap. I was in college, but I saved up for this because this was my god brother and cousin. So I decided that, I think we went on like Nike.com and East Bay. East Bay. And he started personalizing his cleats and his colors of his school with his name, his number. They were like, damn, like his teammates were like, dang, where you get your cleats at? I want those to be our team cleats. And he was like, nah, my god sister bought these for me. Right. But something started to happen. He started to not care about his grades after. So I always bought him cleats, but it always would be after the first semester, after Christmas. Football season is no longer in. He doesn't play basketball or any spring sports. His grades started to drop. So I remember specifically this one report card in his 12th grade year. Every quarter he would get this, not every semester. So he sent over his report card and he was like, hey, God, Mom, I'm ready. I got my grades. And she was like, what the heck is this? Why are there B's and F's? And he was like, but I got other good grades. She said, you owe me $40. I don't know what his grades were, but he owed her over $40. Do you think that he learned? Unfortunately not. So I'm not saying that this will work with everybody, but what I am saying is that if you're consistent, it will work with most people, okay? Reinforcement does work over punishment, okay? So we'll talk about punishment in a second, okay? So do you have any questions regarding reinforcement? Put a 1 in the chat box if this makes sense. Reinforcement is any event that strengthens a behavior. Positive reinforcement is you're adding something to increase the behavior that you want. And please note that if you're helping as a caregiver, as a big sister of a kid, you don't want to start giving away money for everything that they do, because after a while, and you probably were recipients of this, after a while, the money doesn't mean anything, meaning you have to give the kid more money. Like $1 means not much once the kid is used to getting $1. So now you need to increase it to $2. You don't want to do that because you'll run out of money, or you don't want to keep increasing it. Okay. So now let's get into schedules of reinforcement. So write this down as well. You may not have to write down the entire, the definition, because you'll have the slides, but you need to write down a note saying, I need to go review the 2 schedules of reinforcement. And you'll also get a copy of this video as well, uploaded in your portal. So fixed schedule, there's 2 types of schedules for reinforcement. Let me just say that, because that might be the way it's worded on a test. There are 2 types of schedules of reinforcement. So the first type is fixed. So fixed is every single time you do something good, you're going to get rewarded. So for example, we usually do this when we're teaching a new behavior. So for example, for potty training, every time my son says potty, because that's the first step in shaping the behavior to then eventually go to the potty on his own. Every time he says potty, we jump up and down. Yeah, we make a big deal out of it every time. Okay, we don't give him money, just jump up and down to the point where now he jumps up and down, right? But that will get old, because eventually you don't want to reinforce somebody every single time, because you want this behavior to be automatic. You want them to be independent. So what happens over time is you start to thin it out, meaning it goes into variable schedules of reinforcement, meaning they don't know when the reward is coming, and that increases their ability to do the behavior more because they never know when the reward is coming. Okay, so this reminds me of a slot machine. I know that you're young, but a slot machine at a casino, No, they're on a variable ratio. No one knows when the slot machine is going to hit. So they'll sit there forever and ever and ever, hoping that on the 30th time it'll hit, right? So same thing with behavior. A child is now shaped to do well in school, to clean up the house. So then your parent stops giving you allowance money because they're like, I done gave you allowance money every single Friday. Now it's just an expectation. Put a 2 in the chat box if your parent or caregiver has ever said this. It's just your job that you need to wash the dishes. I'm not going to give you a reward every time. That's your job. And to a degree it is, because eventually I hope that you want to move out. And believe it or not, I work with a lot of youth your age 16 to 25. And it wasn't until they moved out on their own that they realized, like, either they wish their parents would have pushed them to be more independent. I actually hear that more because some parents coddle the kids way too much. And then some kids have said, I wish that my parent I wish my parent would have taught me. And then some of them say, like, oh, that's why they tell us to turn off the lights. Because I used to do these youth workshops like at my office, and I remember giving them a list of things that are required and then things that they desire to keep their first apartment up and running. Like what bills are required for them to pay to stay in the apartment, right? To live like comfortably. So I showed them the list, and one of the girls said, why is water on here? I said, because that's a bill. She said, oh, I thought water was included. I thought it was free. Girl, bye. Now, there are some apartments that certain utilities are free, but majority of apartments, water and trash is on you. My first apartment, gas, I think, was free, but electricity, because they knew that most of the apartment ran on electricity. Apartment owners are very smart. They know that they may only have one thing that's gas. Maybe they only have the heater that's gas, and there's no air conditioner. So everything else is electronic. So they know, oh, I ain't paying that electric bill. So put a 2 in the chat, put a 1 in the chat box if your parent or caregiver has ever told you, when you leave a room, turn off the lights. Because I know I got that so many times, and I did not understand it, boy, until I moved out into my first home. Because the apartment wasn't so bad because I was barely there. I was out. You know, I was having a good time in my youth years. But when I got my own house, and the house is 1,900 square feet, and you got a lot of rooms with lights, I swear every time somebody came over, I mean, I could pay the bill, but I'm like, why would I pay extra? Why are we having all these lights on in the whole house? Turn the hall light off. Ain't nobody walking down the hallway. That bill can run you, if you got air conditioner, over $100 a month. So put a T in the chat box if you understand and are thankful for your lights being on right now. You need to be in a state of gratitude that your lights are on, because guess what also is operating off electricity? What you watching me on right now. And if you're watching me on a cell phone, you have to charge your phone somehow. So if you ever get mad at your caregivers, you need to be in a state of gratitude. They ain't got to pay your electricity bill. They can let you sit out there in the dark and you got to go find a hot spot. So be grateful. Okay. So you will see a summary of these positive and negative reinforcement. Now, I mentioned punishment. Punishment, to a degree, I'm going to say culturally, does not work. Put a P in the chat box if you've ever been on punishment. And while you at it, how long have you been on punishment? What's the longest you've been on punishment? Like, don't go out your room, right? So the longest I've been on punishment was a month. Oh, Lord, I thought I was going to pass out, right? A month. I was like, I think in the 4th grade or something. I had a bad mouth. I was talking back to the teacher, but then my mom finally realized once she called a teacher meeting why I was talking back to the teacher. This teacher would grab my hair. She would yank my hair back if I asked her a question about the work. Her name was Miss Medina. I remember her. And I wonder where she is now. But I so dislike this lady. And when my mom heard the way that she was talking to me, because my mom was standing outside the door one day and the lady thought that the principal and my mom were gone. Woo! My mom heard how she was talking to the kids. My mom was like, you go ahead and go back to class. I got put off punishment that day. Because sometimes, the parents don't believe you when you do get in trouble. So punishment is a consequence that decreases. So please write that down. Reinforcement always increases a behavior, whether it's positive or negative reinforcement. Punishment always decreases a behavior to decrease the likelihood of the behavior happening again. So these are some examples of punishments that you may have seen in your life or around you. So one is in sports. there's been times where certain terminology is derogatory, discriminatory, and they're not able to use it. So I've seen, I don't use this word, but in a basketball game, a gentleman called a basketball player called another basketball player gay. I guess just because of what he did in the game. And he got fined over $1 million. Put a 1 in the chat box if you've ever seen that. A sports player says something inappropriate on the field, on the court, on social media, and the NFL, NBA, baseball, they get fined. And you like, dang, why did they get fined so much? Well, I mean, they make $30 million. So, but they're also on a pedestal because they are serving as models for kids, right? So heavy fines. Another one that you may see is if someone has excessive tardies, high schools have a certain room for those kids to go in. Okay. Another one is, and this is one, if you have sports at your schools that you've seen, sports kids or adults, they lose eligibility to play if they don't have a certain GPA. So punishment is decreasing the likelihood, I'm going to punish you. You ain't going to play. You going to bench. You going to redshirt. Okay. Now, I'm going to explain why punishment don't really work, but depending on who inflicts the punishment, it might work culturally. So clearly, I grew up in a Black family. Is my mom, I'm still scared to my mom to this day, and I'm 40. Okay, so put it in the chat box if you're scared of your parent. Like, you would never like disrespect your caregiver, your parent, whether that's a grandparent or your mom or dad or even your big sister or brother. You like, they gonna put me in a wall. Like, like that, I'm like, that's good role modeling right there. To a degree, it can be unhealthy, but I mean, it's good. So to me. And so what ended up happening was, I remember I was 11 years old. This was my last whooping. And this is so like embarrassing. So what happening was my mom had told me, don't go around the corner. Right. And so I said, all right, I'm not going to go around the corner, like with my bike, because it was a pretty dangerous neighborhood in Compton where we stayed at the time. So I had my bike and I actually did not go around the corner. But when she came outside to look for me, I was actually at the corner turning around. But what it looked like is that I was coming from around the corner. Okay. So what ended up happening is she said, didn't I tell you, don't be going around the corner? And I said, I didn't. And she was like, you lied. I'm like, I'm not. And I didn't have a history of lying to my mom or anything like that. So that wasn't the issue. But she just didn't believe me. I don't know if she was having a bad day or something. And so what ended up happening is she told me to go in the house. I already knew what that meant. She was like, go in your room. And I got a whipping. She had me like 3 times. And I was like, oh my God, I got a whipping for something I did not even do. And so that just taught me, don't even go close to the corner. However, the reason I'm bringing that up is for most kids, because I have done this, punishment actually does not decrease a behavior that you don't want to see anymore. Put a 1 in the chat box if you agree with this statement I'm about to say. It just sometimes teaches the kids how to be more manipulative, not to get caught. That's what punishment does. Oh, if I do this, I'm going to get a whooping. So I'm just going to figure out a more creative way not to get caught. So the reason why, as a therapist, we prefer reinforcement is because if you look at the definition, it's always focusing on strengthening. I'm a strength-based person, strengthening a behavior. I don't want to focus on lack. I want to focus on what I want you to be, what I want you to do. So what needs to happen is a conversation. And back in the 80s and 90s, there was no conversation. I'm a parent. You do as I say, not as I do. Put a 2 in the chat box if you ever heard that. Because when we get into chapter, the developmental psychology, we're going to talk about maybe why your parents say those things. Okay. So, and please share what you learned with your parents in a respectful manner. You know what I'm saying? And so, okay, so we talked about reinforcement. We talked about punishment. And another thing is punishment, the behavior may go away, but the problem is with the manipulation with a lot of kids, I'll say, it doesn't go away for a long time. So what happens is the behavior may come back because there was no teachable moment, if that makes sense. Okay. So it says, even though punishment suppresses unwanted behavior, it does not guide one toward the desirable behavior. So parents of delinquent youth often lack the awareness of how to reinforce the desirable behavior. They're so focused on getting rid of the behavior that they're not really taking the time out to teach the kid the desirable behavior. Okay. So psychologists and therapists, we favor positive and negative reinforcements over punishment, especially in child rearing. Okay, so just give you some examples again of different types of punishment, because there's different types of punishment as well, like positive and negative. So positive would be administer an adversive stimulus, such as a spanking or like an adult, a parking ticket. So something is added for you to not to do that anymore, right? But then the negative punishment is they withdraw a desirable stimulus. So that would be like a timeout. Okay, so as a recap, before I give you the summary of the other two theorists, recap is, remember, classical conditioning is involuntary responses based on associated or paired events. That's Pavlov, so make sure you review that. Operant conditioning is more voluntary, meaning you're choosing to engage in a behavior. That's associated with consequences like positive and negative reinforcement, punishment, and then they give the definition of positive and negative. So put a 1 in the chat box if this makes sense to you, and I can move forward, give you an example, and then close us out with the other two theorists. Put a 1 in the chat box if this makes sense, like we can move forward. Okay, pretty simple. Some of this stuff you already know. It's just giving a name to the things that maybe you've been doing, okay? So let's talk about this. Is this positive or negative reinforcement? Your father gives you a credit card at the end of your first year in college because you did so well. As a result, your grades continue to get better in your second year. So put a P or an N. Is it positive or negative reinforcement? It is reinforcement, not punishment. Okay, it's a P, positive. Okay. And this is also, please note, operant conditioning. So if you're asked that on a quiz or a test, is this operant or classical conditioning? Remember, classical conditioning is pairing two events with like a neutral stimulus, like the bell with the dog, the lion with the song, but reinforcement is positive and negative, okay? Now let's move forward. These are pretty simple to understand. J.B. Watson. So what you want to know about J.B. Watson is he took it a step further, and he did focus on like associations, pairing, like Pavlov, but he is known for the little Albert experiment. So write him down as the little Albert experiment, J.B. Watson, okay? So this, some experiments that people do happen on accident, okay? So imagine they're doing some type of study with children for developmental psychology. All of these little 9-month-old kids are in a room playing, etc. So they want to see how the kids are going to react. So, you know, the kids are reacting to little animals and the little cages, the little rabbits, the little pet mouses, everything, right? So the kid is exposed to a little white rat or whatever. And the kid likes it. Let's just say the little kid is petting it like, oh, little cute little pet mice or mouse, right? So as the kid is petting or soothing the little animal, a loud noise goes off. Pairing. Now what happens is every time, this should sound like generalization. This is why those terms are important. Every time little Albert saw anything that was white, he got scared. So not only did he necessarily get scared of the white rat and the noise, think about pairing, put a 1 in the chat box if this is making sense. It was paired, big noise, I jump, I'm petting a white mice or mouse. Put a 1 in the chat box if this makes sense, okay? Put a 2 in the chat box if it is not. I'm petting the white little animal, a loud noise goes off, I jump. I'm 9 months old, I freak out. When I go home, my parents realize when it's Christmas, I don't like my dad dressing up as Santa Claus because he has a white beard. And the parent is like, what the heck? So, of course, they go back to the researcher, and now they recognize that when that happened, the kid was conditioned to generalize, get me? Anything that's white and furry, I ain't having it because everything like that scares me. Okay, this is very similar to people who have PTSD, which we'll talk about in a later lecture, war veterans or trauma victims. They get conditioned that whatever happened during the time of the event, kind of like we were talking about, like with the music, when you hear a music song, a memory gets triggered. Same thing with trauma victims, but their body will have a fight or flight response at times, kind of like this kid, and they'll get scared. Okay. Now the last one is Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura is known as, he focused on observing children with aggressive behaviors, or to see if a kid would have aggressive behaviors. So his experiment was known as the Bobo doll experiment. In your textbook, on YouTube, on Google, if you look it up, you'll be able to see pictures, okay? They put all these kids in a room and they let the kids watch let's just put a current date. Let's just say these kids went in and watched, what is wrestling now? WWE? Because it was WWF. When I was a kid, it was WWF with Hulk Hogan and all them, right? So let's just say these kids are watching wrestling. So the wrestlers, put a 2 in the chat box if you ever watch wrestling. Put a 3 in the chat box if you ever tried a wrestling move on somebody. Have you ever put a 3 in the chat box if you ever tried a wrestling move? Like, I'm just going to jump off. I used to try it. Like, I'm going to jump off the bed and I still have a scrape on my knee because I landed on the wrong part of the floor and something scratched me on the bed. Right? Because I actually went to the WWFs out here. I think they were at like the Coliseum because the Staples Center wasn't up yet or whatever, but it was super cool. So, or I think we went somewhere in Anaheim too. So as a kid, so it was pretty fun. So imagine watching these things kind of like you do with cartoons, and you try to go mock what you saw on TV, right? So what they did is they then took the kids into another room and they put the same blow-up doll, like kind of like, let's just say a kid on the video was wrestling with a blow-up doll. It was called the Bobo doll. And let's just say the kid on the video that these kids were watching and observing, that it was kicking the doll. You'll see the pictures of it. The kid was like jumping on the doll. It was like super funny, but they were trying to see how quickly a kid would pick up aggressive behavior. So be very careful what you expose your little people to around you, even though you're a kid, so your parents exposes you to things, but that doesn't mean you have to continue the pattern with little people around you. So be careful about what you say and what you do, because how many of you have seen this? Put a 1 in the chat box. Somebody uses profanity and the kid repeats it. Put a 1 in the chat box if you've ever seen that. Immediately. Now put a 2 in the chat box if you laughed. Don't lie. Put a 2 in the chat box if you were like, that was funny. Immediately, you reinforce that kid. Uh-oh. Oh, shoot. You then just taught that kid that cursing is funny. Now, what happens is, and I'll get back to the Bobo doll, and tell me what your thoughts are about that. Put an emoji like, oh, shoot, because what you've done is, even though you may laugh and then try to back it up with, no, you're not supposed to be doing that. What do you think the kids saw? They saw you laughing. So now as a 3-year-old, they're now confused. Is it good or is it bad? So what they'll do probably one more time is they'll say it again because they like you laughing. Think about it. Kids like when you laugh, right? So then the next time, hopefully you caught on and you'll be like, no, you're not supposed to do that. Don't hit them. Because they observe the behavior from you or from someone around you. Okay. So same thing with observable behavior. They first put these kids in the room. They let them see the video of another kid hitting another Bobo doll. Then they put these kids in another room. And what they saw through a 2-way mirror was that these kids were doing the same thing that they saw on TV. So he focused on learned behavior. Aggressive behavior modeled, aggressive behavior acted out from a child. Okay. So this summarizes your chapter 6 in the physical textbook. It's chapter 5. Okay.